What's up YouTube, Josh of All Trades here, and today we're talking the night of episode 7, Ordinary Death. And oh man, I freaked out because this episode was so good. Like, this was probably my favorite episode so far, so without any further ado, let's get right into it. The scene that showed the prosecution, Helen Weiss versus Dr. Katz, may have been the most fun single scene there was in this series, and it was great because the dialogue between them was witty and fun and just interesting to watch, but also like it made us forget about the gravity of the situation, that Naz's life is hanging on this testimony, and this guy presented it in a very convincing way, so convincing that maybe he even turned some of the jury. But aside from the fun parts of tonight's episode, there were 3 major cues that I tuned into. First off, Box looked really vulnerable in this episode, and that was a very refreshing pivot from where he is introduced as the subtle beast. Now, a few major things happen in this episode. First off, he's getting close to retirement age, so he's wrapping up his affairs at the precinct and looking at leaving. And at the very beginning of the episode, we see a murder that's very similar to the one that Naz is being tried for, so much so that the detectives actually raise some questions like, hey, is this one related? And a really big shakeup occurs when it's presented in court that Box did not go about the crime scene the way he was supposed to. He got that inhaler and he broke protocol in a major way, which discredits him in the eyes of the jury. But for me, this really worked because Box's experience on the show is really just like a detective's abstraction of the human experience, and it makes it really relatable to me. Okay, now follow me on this. It's relatable because when we're trying hard on something, it seems like we're always giving it our all and we're giving 150%. But when we look back, there's that saying that hindsight is always 50-50, and Box is getting some of that in this episode. As he's looking after his retirement party, he's got these golf clubs that some coworker had bought him, and he's looking at them and he's thinking about, you know, what he did with the case and how he could have done better. And that's just like a very human moment of the show because we can all relate to that on some level. The second big insight that I got from this episode is that Stone and Chandra are basically Naz's mom and dad. Both Chandra and Naz's mom are strong female characters, and they have an amazing presence in the show. Now Chandra, we have her in front of the jury saying very convincing things and doing her job in a very professional and convincing way. And then we have Naz's mom, who also on that same kind of spectrum is not dwelling on the fact that life's been unfair to her. She took a job that she did not want to, and instead of complaining about it, she's just grinding things out, doing what she has to do to pay bills and get her responsibilities taken care of. And then very similarly, we have that both of these characters at one time were like 100% dedicated and they were on Naz's side. And over time, you know, even though they maintain this facade of, you know, unity or that they want to be with Naz, they've been convinced that he actually is guilty. This really came to a head tonight in the scene where Chandra's in the prison cell with Naz and they have this kiss. And there's a little bit of hesitation on Chandra's face when she thinks about what happened that night. And then she gets up and leaves. And on Naz's face, the camera catches his gaze and we get his thoughts, also returning to Andrew's dead body that night. So I think this is actually reaffirming what I think, that Naz is guilty of the murder. And then similarly, there's a duality between Naz's dad and John Stone, that both of these characters are dealing with problems. We've had John Stone dealing with his fee, dealing with his son being ashamed of him, and more internal problems to him. And then we have Naz's dad dealing with these external problems, like his son being accused of murder, the community rallying against him pretty much, and his business partners not wanting to do business and kind of being sketchy with him. But despite the fact that they've been done dirty, both of these characters remain perfectly aligned with Naz. And even though there's reasons to doubt, they want to believe that he's innocent. And this was shown perfectly in the scene when John Stone was back at Dr. Yee's and he's talking with him. He's got this rash coming back. And Dr. Yee says, "Get rid of the cat." And like I've talked about before, I think the cat is tied in with the relationship between Stone and Naz. And Stone replies, "I don't want to." Okay, neither one of these characters, Stone or Naz's dad, wants to give up their faith and their hope that Naz is guilty in the overwhelming presence of evidence that he is. And that's why there's this strong duality between these characters that I don't know why it took me so long, but I finally caught on to. And then thirdly and finally, I'm looking at the man of the hour himself, Nassir Khan, and it took me a long time to understand this, but I finally got it tonight, that Naz is paper thin. He's a weak character, and he's flat. And any meaning that comes to mind when we as the audience think of him are things that have been assigned to him by other characters in the show. And this really came to a head in tonight's episode, and it showed when he was too weak to stand up for Petey. That last week's episode ended that Naz had some sort of compelling reason, now that this guy Petey was threatening him, that he had to take some sort of action. He failed to do so. It ended up that this guy that was getting abused by Petey committed suicide, which ends up being bad for everyone, because the stuff that this guy's mom was bringing in is the reason that Naz was valuable in prison. He wasn't even valuable of his own accord. You know, these other people were giving him meaning in prison. Another example that I saw of this early on was very early in the episode. I think that it's right after the scene that Naz's dad has the discussion with the other two partial owners of the cab, and it's very heated. And then it cuts to a scene with Naz in prison, and he's sitting there smoking for like 3 seconds, and then it cuts away. And it leaves us with this feeling that everyone else in the show is trying to make some kind of meaningful action, but Naz is the most unproductive character. And although, you know, he's the person that we're most involved in, we're most interested in, he has nothing to do for us. It's everyone else in the show that we need to be interested in. So all that being said, what is going to happen in next week's episode, the finale? I think here's where we're going. First off, there's going to be some finger pointing at Andrea's stepdad, and there certainly should be, because there's some suspicion around this guy. And although we had that scene tonight in the gym where Andrea's stepdad is kind of, you know, putting some pressure on Stone to stop following him, I mean, really, who wouldn't be? He's just some guy that wants his privacy, just like you and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think we're probably looking into this a little bit too much, and the show's producers want us to do that. So whether it's that, or another one of the suspicious characters, or the breach of protocol by Box, or some other event, something's going to derail this trial, and I think Naz is going to be exonerated in court. So for those of you hoping that he's innocent, I think we will get the satisfaction of knowing that he's not going to spend the rest of his life in prison. But despite his victory in the legal system, I think us as the audience, due to the events of the series, will be forced to acknowledge that he is indeed the murderer. And for the finale, either John Stone or more likely Naz's dad in the closing moments of the show will be forced to acknowledge through some sort of cathartic moment that he did indeed raise a killer. So as somber as it is, those are my thoughts of tonight's episode and where I think this series is going. Please leave a comment below if you agree with me or disagree or have a completely different theory, because I'd be happy to hear it and comment on it as well. All things being said, tonight's episode was so much fun. It took an hour, but it felt like 15 minutes to watch because there is so much anticipation of what was going to happen next. And I was just really excited the whole time. So I will definitely be watching next Sunday for the finale, episode 8 of the night of. I know you will be too. And tune in afterwards to hear my review of it. And I will see y'all then. Goodbye, y'all.